James Farr here, live from Pasadena Media Studios. Get ready for more piercing and provocative. The Conversation Live starts now. And welcome to another episode of The Conversation Live. The Conversation Live focuses on social justice, restorative justice, inclusion, and equality. Today, coming up on The Conversation Live, we're going to have a critical and uncomfortable conversation. Our children are far much younger, having to choose between gender identity and their sexuality. Also, we're going to take a look at increase in suicide rate amongst teens as a result of identifying with the gender and being bullied. And then lastly, we want to talk about, from a family perspective, what a family should do as we kind of face this within the culture. But for context for today's conversation, Jared, let's roll in this first package, and then we'll come back with our guest, Dr. Eshele Williams, on the other side.
Nobody's the same. Children find their own identity in their own way, and sometimes their gender identity is different than their assigned sex. When you talk about sexual identity, that's what's assigned at birth, and it's usually based on your anatomy. You look at, they say, what'd you have? Well, I had a boy. How do you know? Well, I look down here, it's a boy. Okay, but oftentimes that will not be how a child identifies. Their gender identity is a deep sense of identification that they feel inside, and that usually you get that sense about 3 years old. And you'll begin to see that in terms of the child beginning to make choices that identify with what society has determined is feminine or masculine. And the child will begin to gravitate towards that sort of thing. Now, this changes. Some parents say, well, it's just a phase. Yes, sometimes it is just a phase.
And welcome back. And then, Jared, let's cue up this second video because I want to provide some context and balance from a different lens.
I think one thing you should know about sexual identity if your child seems confused is I think you need to know God's intention for sexuality in the sense of in Genesis 1 where it says that when God said, let us make man in our image, and in the image of God, he made them male and female. I think we see in the scripture that gender or sex is not fluid. It's not open to interpretation. It's not available for us as human beings to change. God is God. And I think as parents, we have to be convinced of this truth, because if we're not convinced of this truth, we'll easily be led astray by trying to please and affirm our children. And we see that all the time. 4-year-olds believing that they are another sex, and the parents feeling like, to be a loving parent, I have to go along with this. But if we are anchored by the word of God, then we know better how to handle these types of situations. I also think it's valuable to know that any confusion about identity is rooted in sin.
And welcome back. My guest today is Dr. Eshele Williams. She's a licensed marriage and family therapist. And today we're going to unpack some of these different issues around gender identity, sexuality, and she's going to provide us with a little bit of expertise just as a clinician and how people actually show up in these spaces. Eshele, thank you so much for being with me.
Thank you, James, for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. So, this subject hit home for me, and you were probably one of the first people that I called because I was trying to understand it from a professional standpoint. But for backstory, I took my daughter to sleepaway camp, and as she was checking in, one of the counselors asked her, what are her pronouns? And the bubble that I had lived in and she's existed in for her last 11 years kind of popped, because I see this on the peripheral. It's not necessarily something we've had to deal with at home. But it was a different experience. And so I'm understanding that children are having to identify either with a certain gender or not. Sexuality is something that they're dealing with. But then when we look at the culture, Sister Perry said in the last segment that it is a sin. How are families dealing with things like this?
I think it's complicated for families nowadays. You have two different sides to things, right? You've got a biblical side, as you see, and then you've got a side that says, this is who I see my son or daughter being, and my vision for them for their future and what it is that they want. Or maybe we allow our children to decide. So I think families are pulled in two different directions. Just like you showing up at sleepaway camp, you don't think you're going to be faced with a dilemma that has your child make a choice so early, or having you to make a choice for your child so early. So as we think about it, I think there's some confusion behind it. And I think families feel like these things are either pushed on them, or they're having to make decisions too early, or it's not something that they choose to delve in at all, and they just want to let their kids be kids. So I think it's a complicated situation.
Because I know when we talked about it, one of the things that you shared with me is like, what's the concern, right? You know, you're taking your kid into a different environment, and you were saying that what most parents don't want is their child to suffer.
Sure.
And so how does, you know, like I said, I'm experimentally putting myself out there, like this was something different for us. And it made us think about a lot of different things, right? But what is that suffrage? Like, what are parents trying to protect their children from?
I think in today's society, we see a lot of things going on that we want to protect our kids from. You and I have had a conversation about trauma. We've had a conversation about the media and what they see on TV and what they're exposed to. People want to protect their kids from being overexposed to violence, from being overexposed to things that they wouldn't have them learn about at such an early age. So I think a lot of it is around an issue of safety. Is my kid safe in the environments in which they're going in? And safety comes in a lot of forms. Are they emotionally safe? Are they physically safe? Are they intellectually safe? Are they mentally safe? So as we're putting them into environments that may be a little bit confusing, we're in conversations maybe we don't understand, and that we have not chosen to have with our kids, the issue really comes down to, is my kid in a safe environment or not? And is that something that I can protect or shield them from?
I mean, because within the culture, you know, there's probably going to be one or two reactions. You know, either you're going to be disowned, you know, or some may elect to kind of try to pray it that way, you know.
Sure.
And are either of those effective tools in terms of dealing with your adolescent, your tweener, your teenager, or even your adult child?
Well, you said within the culture. And is that African American culture, or what culture are we speaking?
I'm speaking family, but yeah.
Okay, in the family context. So in the family culture, it really depends on what you're steeped and rooted in. If you're steeped and rooted in spirituality or faith or Christianity or Catholicism, then there are certain things that you are going to do according to that faith. If you're saying, I'm not necessarily spiritual, and you take on a more philosophical approach, then you're going to think about it more so with your head. So as we think about where I come from, who I am, what I'm rooted in, then those are the ways I'm going to approach the context of gender and sexuality and my child's behavior. So if I try to pray it away, then, it's because I'm rooted in church.
Because, I mean, a simple Google search, YouTube search, I mean, unfortunately, it is much more common now. We're seeing incidents of suicide and bullying and things of that nature. And so, your 8-year-old, your 9-year-old, your 15-year-old, decides to share with a parent, I identify this way, or I don't identify that way. So, what I'm aiming for in this conversation is to give people tools, how to process, because without rejecting,
Sure.
you know what I mean, but also being understanding, but also being firm kind of in your own personal value system. Because a psychologist told me that our children are being raised in an entirely different world than what we have been raised in. So I'm trying to hopefully give the audience some balance of what to expect and how to help nurture and navigate.
So we were living in an age or a stage or period where children did not have rights. And when they didn't have rights, they were property of parents. And the parent could decide who their child was, what their child was going to do, what they liked or didn't like. And now that we're moving out of that, children have expression, and gender expression is one of those. So as they have different expressions and we're asking them, what do you think? How do you feel? Be your own person. Tell me what, tell me how it works out for you. We get some answers that we're not necessarily prepared for.
Yeah, I mean, I understand they even call it adultism now, where, children are looking at adults in the room like, you aren't always right, you don't have all the answers. I mean, even the example of, why do I have to ask you, can I use the bathroom, when I know I have to use the bathroom. Let me check in real quick. You're watching The Conversation Live. The Conversation Live focuses on social justice, restorative justice, inclusion, and equality. Today we're having a critical and uncomfortable conversation with Dr. Eshele Williams. We're taking a look inside of gender identity, children having to identify with sexuality or not, but we're seeing more and more, as we touched on in the last segment, suicide is on the rise amongst our tweeners, teenagers, and a lot of it has to do with bullying. So Jared, let's take a look at this next package, and then we'll talk with Dr. Williams on the other side.
This morning, a community is now coming together to honor a teenager who took his own life.
Wayne Wade, Gabrielle Union, Ludacris, and Janelle Monáe are giving money to Shelby's family to pay for funeral expenses.
There's been an outpour of love and support from the community since a Huntsville high school student passed away last week. And today a funeral was held for him. Family, friends, and others in the community gathered at the Rock Family Worship Center to say their final goodbyes to 15-year-old Nigel Shelby. Shelby took his life after allegedly being bullied for his sexuality. Many who attended wore rainbow colors and anti-bullying clothing to show their support for Shelby and for others like him.
A 14-year-old boy dead because of adults' bad decisions. That's the accusation Kamika Shelby and her attorneys are bringing against Huntsville City Schools.
They failed to prevent it.
They're investigating the school district's policy on how they treat homophobic bullying and the facts about who knew what and why Kamika allegedly wasn't informed.
He had been in the office several times about being bullied. When they contacted me about it, he was already gone.
Attorney Ben Crump says they're requesting public disclosures from the school.
Get to the truth of how people knew about this suicide note and failed to act.
Welcome back, Eshele. This is tough because, no one certainly should be bullied to the point of, suicide becoming the option for them. But where do you see like the breakdown? I mean, we're looking at being more accepting, and so when you're counseling families, and maybe not even in this specific area, but when you're dealing with families, how do you deal with, because there was a suicide note in this case. So there were some clear indicators of distress and trauma. How do you deal with that? How could this have been prevented?
I think one of the things we have to do is we have to take an emotionally intelligent and empathetic stance to whatever the issue is. So we understand that everybody has challenges. Because your specific challenge is not mine, doesn't mean that I don't need to put myself in your shoes to understand that piece. I think we're a society that doesn't really take certain things seriously, and now we know in suicide on the rise, that's one of them. And we see the bullying piece. Nobody should be bullied at all, not to the point of, but at all. So as we think about that, it's taking things really seriously and taking some action on the other side of saying, I really get you, or I feel you, I understand where you're coming from. Where's the action behind it?
I mean, you've, in your own personal life, had to deal with some bullying. The result of rumors.
Yes.
Mistruths. I mean, at least as I have learned to understand it. What was your experience like? How much of that you want to share?
Well, I can share to the point where you understand that people say and will feel the way that they feel about you. And when a rumor is put out, when people carry that rumor and you haven't decided who you are, and you're not given the space to really understand who you are on the inside and out, a rumor can impact you. in such a way.
How did it, because you were young.
Oh yeah.
I mean, you were a young girl at the time.
Oh, absolutely. So
preteen. How did that impact you?
it impacts your whole life.
How?
It impacts you going to school and your ability to associate with other people. It impacts your ability to find out who you are from the inside out if people have labeled you in a certain way from the beginning. And it also impacts the life you're going to live from here on out. So I have a son, and I look at this package and I look at everything that they're saying, and as I look at that, I say, this could be my kid. It could be my kid, and how do I prevent that as a parent? So it not only talks about my generation and my experience and my parents' experience trying to protect me, but it also lends to the next generation, my son, and how I protect him from whether it be a rumor or somebody being angry or mean and treating him in a way that's not valuing who he is.
How did you cope? I mean, how did you mask, to try to project something that was other than what was purportedly being said about you?
It was exactly that, a mask. I smiled when I needed to, and at some point I was angry when I needed to be. So angry with myself, angry with other people, and what it did was caused a barrier and a rift for me getting to know who I actually am and who I was then, as well as a barrier and a rift for with the individuals that didn't protect me or take care of me. So some of it was I shut down and I didn't say a thing.
Do you see that it, well into your adult life, how it may have impacted you or is still impacting you?
Absolutely.
How so?
I am more empathetic as a result of having been bullied, as a result of having been labeled, as a result of having not been understood. And as I take my empathy and my own experience into the work that I do, I'm also more protective. So now I've become an advocate for individuals that are bullied, that are treated unfairly. So when there's some injustice, I run to the call instead of running away from it, because I understand exactly what the dynamic is for people that cannot defend themselves. I was defenseless at one point. I am no longer that.
Now, was it that you felt defenseless, or did you feel like the people who should have been there to protect you either didn't understand or didn't protect you enough? Because again, we're going back to, we talked about suffering.
Sure.
As a parent, you don't want your child to suffer.
Of course.
We also talked about, kind of the cultural isms and the lens that our parents may see things through, as well as our children, and you in this case being the child, being raised in a different world than that of your parents, right? So how did that show up for you?
I think as a child, thinking about who was supposed to protect me, when we think about parents, when we thought about administration at school and different things like that, they go, oh, kids will get over it. You'll have a fight today and then you'll be friends tomorrow. So it wasn't a thing that was really taken seriously, so there was really not much action taken on anybody's behalf, not on my behalf.
I mean, you had to transfer schools, so this wasn't something that just kind of sat on in one sandlot, so to speak, one yard. I mean, you went to another school, and this is way before, I ain't telling your age, but way before social media.
Absolutely.
And even text. I mean, but these rumors, these things kind of follow a person.
Absolutely.
And so when you're getting in these new environments, did you have to, was it like a reset, or were you a new person, or did you have to prove all over again that you weren't what these rumors or innuendos were?
Right. So I think there is no reset. One, you can't unring the bell. And no matter how hard you try to unring the bell, you show up in another setting, and all it takes is one individual to have heard whatever was put out there from before, and then that permeates that environment too. I didn't have to choose to change schools. I chose to go into a different program, but no matter what school I went to, no matter how old I've gotten, right, rumors still follow. So if you live in a small community, if you are steeped in and still live in the community in which you've come from as a young person, and that rumor started then, those things don't go away.
Got you. Let me check in real quick. You're watching The Conversation Live. The Conversation Live focuses on social justice, restorative justice, inclusion, and equality. We're having a critical and uncomfortable conversation. My guest today is Dr. Eshele Williams. She's a licensed marriage and family therapist. We've touched on gender identity as well as sexuality amongst our children. We've looked at a little bit more into the bullying and suicide rates that are increasing. But now, like I said, we always try to have a family conversation here, and we talked. You heard from Dwayne Wade's participation in the previous package with helping to pay for some of the funeral expenses, but he has recently supported. Well, let's roll in this last package, Jared, and we'll talk a little bit more about what a father has done, and certainly one from the culture.
And your family was at, I think it was Miami Pride.
Yeah, Miami Pride, yeah.
And you were very supportive of your family being there and also your son Zion being there. Can you talk a little bit about why that was important for you to publicly be supportive?
Yeah, and I don't really talk about it much because, it's Zion's stories to tell. I think as a family, we just support each other. That's our job. And my job as a father is to facilitate their lives and to support them and, to be behind them in whatever they want to do. So the same effort that I'm going to put into Zaire Wade wanting to be a basketball player, the same hours that I'm going to put in to making sure he has the right trainer, that he eats right and he has the right, the right time with me on the basketball floor, and the knowledge that I give him is the same time I'm going to give Zion with the things he wants to do. Whether, he's a writer, he's someone who's has an unbelievable mind, imaginary mind. He's a reader. So it's the same thing for me. It doesn't change, what my role is as a father, what my role is as a parent. My role is to support my kids and love my kids.
Do you have any message to other parents during Pride Month?
I don't need, not even through Pride Month, just period. I think I'm asked a question about my kids a lot from a sports, perspective. It's like, I think people expect, you to parent each kid the same. And I always tell people they all are different. And I have to get to know them where they are, and I have to be able to parent them what they are and who they are.
And welcome back. Dwayne Wade and his wife, Gabrielle Union, there was probably mixed or equal support, as well as there was people who basically drug him, for supporting your kid. And again, these goes back to some of those cultural things, some of the isms and pathology. I think about your son, and then I think about my son, and my son's the cutest boy ever, and your son, all right now.
Cuter than yours.
but I can't think of two happier little boys. When you just full of energy when you see him. Your son is energetic. He's vibrant. He has interests. My son will kiss your ankles, your elbows, and literally every other word, and this is without exaggeration, he's telling us he loves us, right? I love you, Daddy, I love you, Mom, I love you. So, like, that has become such a part of our culture and norms at home, but society may see that as him showing up in one form of masculinity, but also feminine as well, because he's soft, you know what I mean? And so as a parent, I want you to, one, as a clinician, but as a parent, I'm trying to balance, how do I not make my boy soft? The mama's boy, which I am as well, but how do you balance that? Like, what advice, when you're counseling and talking with your clients, how are you helping people kind of navigate not making your kids soft?
Well, I don't think there's a soft or not soft. If your kid is emotional, then that's just his style. If he's a little bit more edgy, then that also is his style. So we have to take an emotionally intelligent look at ourselves first. Mm-hmm. Who are we? How do we respond? And how are we responded to? And then we think about, how are we going to respond to our children? What do they need to feel? We have some kids that are a little bit more emotional than others. And if they are, then I'm not going to say and try to beat the emotion out of them. I'm going to say that it's okay for you to be that way. And there are some people that are not going to value that.
What about the people who say you shouldn't let a girl play with trucks or a little boy play with Barbie dolls? Is there any merit to that?
Women are just as good engineers as men. Mm-hmm. And they get out there and they do their thing on the field, on the basketball court, within construction sites, just like men do. So that's something where we're talking about gender equality. And if I don't have the ability within myself to allow my child to choose, then I limit their capabilities in whatever they're going to do. So if I small them up in one area, I small them up in other areas. And what I want to do is promote them as best I can.
But an older generation will say, you gonna make that boy gay.
No? And it depends on what you think and how you feel about that too. I can't make anybody anything, right? The only thing that I want to make sure of is that they're safe and that they're promoted in a positive way. I need to be the guide on the side for my child and not the sage on the stage. It's not about what I say. It's about me guiding my child to his destiny, to his best purpose, to all of the things that he's supposed to do within this life. Not about how I think or feel about them. I get to put myself aside and put my child first because he's paramount. And if I do that, I've won.
Absolutely. We're going to park it right there. How can people get in touch with you, Eshele?
I'm available on social media. I've got some things going. I'm a life and family coach. I can be reached at eshelewilliams.com, which is my website. It's under construction right now, but you can find information and get in touch with me there. You can also get in touch with me. If I had a phone number, I'd give it to you.
You can always check in with Conversation Live, and we will make sure we'll put up her contact information and some of the comments under the thread. Again, Eshele, I really appreciate you taking time to sit down with me. I mean, we've done this over a few different areas, and I've been looking forward to having you in this seat. Probably one of the smartest women I know, and I always appreciate your counsel and your wisdom. Again, you're watching The Conversation Live. The Conversation Live focuses on social justice, restorative justice, inclusion, and equality. Today we had a critical and uncomfortable conversation. We touched on gender identity as well as sexuality that our children are having to face at a much earlier age, bullying resulting in suicides, as well as how we within the culture can kind of process and be a best resource for our children. Until we have another opportunity to speak with you, as always, agape. The Conversation Live is brought to you by